Welcome back to my podcast, Pages and Pods. The next episodes will be dedicated to the works of Stephen Harrod Buhner. Stephen was a master herbalist, author, and planetary initiate. He passed into the next realm in 2022. There's a website devoted to his works at stephenharrodbuhner.com, which is listed in the show notes. In fact, all references in this podcast will be listed there when available, and links will be given. I never met him in person, but I believe that anyone who reads his books with an open heart will feel as if they knew him. His writing style honors the earth and the reader's relationship with it. He evokes the spiritual connection available to anyone willing to walk barefoot. His style may be difficult for modern readers, given that our schools have abandoned the works of great writers like him. Even in my generation, we had a Norton anthology of literature to peruse samples of classic works. Fortunately, I had an English teacher who insisted we read Faust by Goethe, Candide by Voltaire, and the Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. These authors take readers on a deep journey into the mind, where they wrestle with the consequences of passion, such as Faust, the meaning of truth and the polemics of right and wrong, as in Candide, and the consequences of our actions on the landscape, as described by Aldo Leopold. While reading Buhner's work, I couldn't help but compare them to a Sand County Almanac and the way Leopold describes life in rural Wisconsin in 1948. In the chapter titled Good Oak, Leopold writes, "There are two spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing breakfast comes from the grocery, and the other is that heat comes from a furnace." This reminds us that the current crisis of spiritual and nutritional disconnection is not new, but has been going around for a long time, stemming from our disassociation from the land. Another author of Buhner's ilk is Robert Pirsig, and his book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The essence of this book is captured on page 266 of the 1981 edition. Zen Buddhism talks about just sitting, a meditative practice in which the idea of a duality of self and object does not dominate one's consciousness. What I'm talking about here in motorcycle maintenance is just fixing, in which the idea of duality of self and object doesn't dominate one's consciousness. When one isn't dominated by feelings of separateness from what he's doing, then one can be said to care about what he's doing. Pirsig wants us to feel a connection, not disassociating, but engaging with everything around you. It's about being aware of the physical and spiritual world you live in, and to understand that all actions have consequences. A few years before reading Stephen's book titled The Lost Language of Plants, I completed a course of study at the East-West School of Planetary Herbology, operated by Michael and Leslie Tierra. The coursework helped me understand that herbal healing wasn't just about tinctures sold at Whole Foods and online apothecaries, but about the connection we make with the plants themselves. During a retreat with the American Herbalist Guild, I went on a walk with Matthew Wood, founder of the institute that bears his name. He spoke at length about a plant named cleavers, which were abundant at that time of year. Cleavers are excellent for healing the lymphatic system, which is vital to our immune health. Matthew stressed herbs are more than healers, they are teachers. Later, I read Wood's book, 7 Herbs, Plants as Teachers, and a particular line resonated with me. In the grandest sense, plants are representations of the problems of human life. They speak to us in the poetry of the soul. If we are to sum up our experiences, then our cosmological and epistemological worldview is shaped by the books we read and the words we learn. I may have missed Buhner's entire point had I not been mentally and spiritually prepared. Later, a gifted Ayurvedic herbalist named Liz recommended this book to me, and it set me on a long journey into understanding plants as living poetry, perhaps even as vehicles for Earth's elemental spirits to interact with us. Previously, I've discussed spiritual beings in my podcasts, such as the ones about Dion Fortune and Iamblichus, but those podcasts looked into the higher realms. Stephen sinks our feet into the world of elementals. So let's begin with Chapter 1, The Taste of Wild Water, and explore the early lessons in Stephen's life. He begins with a reflection on his great-grandfather, Dr. C.G. Harrod, a county physician in rural Indiana who began his practice in 1911, primarily using botanical medicines and the old methods of tongue inspection. Remember? Say ah and palpation. Stephen is keen on remembering smells. The scent of the bank of a pond of soap and cigarettes, his great-grandmother's strong perfume, stovetop gravy, and fried chicken. In his great-grandfather's office, he recalls the smell of old age, sickness, herbal medicines, and crystalline chemicals. These smells have largely disappeared in our 21st century lives. The muck on the edges of old ponds has been paved over for our safety. Few people have a great-grandmother anymore, and kitchens rarely carry the smell of pan-fried chicken. It's all delivered to your door, ready-made. Hospitals are sterile, except for the superbugs, but they don't smell. Medicines are encapsulated or injected. The only strange syrup in a bottle is NyQuil. And would you really drink that? This chapter hooked me because Buhner's description of his great-grandfather reminded me of my grandfather. Unlike Stephen's, whose world was shaped by the boom and bust years of late 19th century, my grandfather raised a family during the Great Depression. However, like Stephen's ancestor, my grandfather had an affinity for the land. I hope there will be generations to come who will remember a great-grandparent in the way Stephen describes his great-grandfather, as in the following passage. I remember the particular way my great-grandfather walked through the woods. Few walk that way now. That way of walking has a particular smell, a particular gait, a particular rhythm, a particular integration with earth, plants, and water. As he walked through those woods, he would push aside a plant in his path, not brusquely, but as if moving a relative aside. Stephen's great-grandfather belonged to a generation that didn't need weekend retreats to commune with nature. Nature was still alive within them. I've thought about this in the framework of Anthroposophy, which suggests that humanity is developing away from a material connection with the earth toward a purely spiritual existence in our next evolution. This line of thinking says that our ancestors who lived during the Bronze Age and the Classical era could experience elementals, fairies, and satyrs as their earthly bodies resonated with them. I am sure that my grandfather had this connection when I visited him on his 10-acre farm in Texas. He knew every watermelon vine, every strawberry plant. I think he could smell the corn smut before you could see it. I watched him teach my son to plant strawberries the same way he had taught me, and how the best flower bed is planted over a buried carp. But going in a different direction from Anthroposophy, I was considering a mystical Jewish tractate from a great sage known as the Rebbe. In contemplating the end of time, as described in Habakkuk, he wrote that, "It is said of the time to come, a stone in the wall will cry out and a beam from the tree will respond. At present, inert creations are mute. Though trodden upon, they remain silent. But there will come a time when the revelation of the future becomes a reality, that the inert will begin to speak, relate, and demand. At the end of days, even the earth itself may ask, "Why did you trample on me?" Let's get back to the chapter titled, "The Taste of Wild Water." Can you guess what it's about? Cold, refreshing, definitely not from a bottle or tap. Stephen places us sitting next to his great-grandfather at the bank of a pond, immersed in nature around them. My great-grandfather leaning forward and cupping his hand, sliding it under the surface of that glassy pond. He lifted the shining surface to my lips and said, "Here, have you ever tasted this water?" I looked at him askance and caught the gleam in his eye, then bent my head and pursed my lips. I remember the translucency of that water, the tiny particles of dirt floating in its depths, and below it all his life written in the palm of his hand. The water was sweet and cooling. My body liked it. As I lifted my head, I caught the glint in his eye, and he made that particular gritty sound with his teeth as he smiled that I loved so much. "Good, isn't it?" he asked, and I remember nodding. Who would dare do that now? Giardia? Cryptosporidium? Leptospira? Aspergillus niger? You can't just scoop up a handful of water. Stephen writes that development, domestication, and carelessness have led to an exterior wound, our disconnection from nature. Alongside it, we suffer an interior wound, losing joy in being part of nature. I believe it was his desire to bring us awareness of the qualities of the actual world around us, the water, trees, even muck. That's our starting point. The time to take off our shoes and socks and connect to the surfaces below us. If that surface is linoleum or carpet, ask yourself, why? Remember that the Creator also made the demons too. Choose carefully what you stand on. This concludes this podcast from Pages and Pods. If you liked it, click like and subscribe, and I'll keep doing this. Comment, and I'll know you're out there.